The book of Isaiah is a miniature Bible. There are 66 chapters in the book of Isaiah. There are 66 books in our Bible. There are two divisions to the book of Isaiah. The first division corresponds with law, the second division with grace. In Isaiah's first division, there are 39 chapters. There are 39 books of the Old Testament. In Isaiah's second division, there are 27 chapters. They correspond with the 27 books of the New Testament. Gary Stearman is here to discuss with me Isaiah, a miniature Bible.
And all these years, there's been a little hint here, and not till lately have we taken the hint, namely that the Bible has a structure. It has an outline, and we just haven't had the keys to the outline until recently when we discovered that the 22 characters of the Hebrew alphabet, plus their 5 final forms, create a skeletal outline, and each aspect of the outline has a given meaning. Well, Isaiah conforms to the outline.
On today's program, we're going to get into the first 39 and get just as far as we can. In 2 programs, we'll cover the Old Testament in the first 39 chapters. In the second series of 2 programs, total of 4, we will cover the New Testament. In our book, The Mystery of the Menorah and the Hebrew Alphabet, we have listed on page 170 the meanings of the Hebrew letters. We shall see in Isaiah chapter 1 the meaning of Aleph, the letter for God as creator and king. Gary?
He is the strong creator. And by the way, Isaiah chapter 1 is the vision of Isaiah the son of Amoz. And he saw this vision concerning Judah and concerning Jerusalem and concerning the apostasy of his people. Now, Isaiah is, in a way, a very negative book. It's like Jeremiah and Lamentations, in a way, J.R., in that it's a heavy burden that the prophet has to lay upon his people. And he says here in verse 4 of chapter 1, "Ah, sinful nation, a people laden with iniquity, a seed of evildoers, children that are corrupters, they have forsaken the Lord. They have provoked the Holy One of Israel unto anger. They are gone away backward." This sets the theme really of the entire book, except when you get to the final few chapters of Isaiah, then you're looking forward to the new heavens and the new earth.
Now, Gary, in this first chapter, we have a picture of Genesis. In fact, the fall of Adam. When he's talking about here, they have forsaken the Lord, provoked the Holy One of Israel. That sounds like the Garden of Eden, doesn't it?
Right. It certainly does. And also, in Genesis 1:1, we find that mysterious particle, the first and last letters of the Hebrew alphabet, the Aleph Tav, just as Jesus said, "I'm the Alpha and the Omega," or "I'm the Aleph Tav." We find here in chapter 1, verse 4, twice the hidden Aleph Tav, which is never translated into English but appears in the Hebrew manuscript. And so this tells us we're dealing with the book of beginnings in chapter 1 of Isaiah.
And in verse 4, where are those 2 Aleph Tav?
They are between, just ahead of the term Lord and just ahead of the term Holy One of Israel, you find the Aleph and the Tav.
And verse 6 says, "From the sole of the foot even unto the head there is no soundness in it, but wounds and bruises, putrefying sores." That's a picture of the fall of man, isn't it?
It really is.
And we have also Sodom and Gomorrah, which is the story out of Genesis, right here in chapter 1 of Isaiah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Isaiah 1 reflects the ideas to be found in Genesis. And by the way, we should mention one other thing. Verse 21 of Isaiah says, "How is the faithful city become a harlot?" And that word "how" in the Hebrew is echa, which is the name of Lamentations. Echa. It's a lament, and Isaiah is a lamentation in a way.
Our book, The Mystery of the Menorah and the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, is very essential in studying something like this. We have gone through and shown how the Old Testament fits in the 22 letters. And of course, the 39 books of the Old Testament become 22 when they are all put together. Several books are combined together. And we have it here all in this book. We're going to attempt to go through that and point that out to you as we look at Isaiah. Chapter 2 is the letter for bait, the letter for house or temple, the letter for duality. And I think we can see this in chapter 2, Gary.
Chapter 2, verse 2, and it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains and shall be exalted above the hills. Now, this book, J.R., would correspond also to the book of Exodus, and the book of Exodus has Mount Sinai, the Lord's house.
Fascinating. The tabernacle built at Sinai.
Yeah.
And we've got here the mountain of the Lord's house.
Mm-hmm.
And let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, verse 3. Incredible.
Also, we have, at the end of this chapter, we have the houses of Israel under judgment. Namely, verse 19, the holes of the rocks, the caves of the earth, verse 21, the clefts of the rocks. During a time of judgment, they're forced out of their houses into holes in the ground.
That sounds like 40 years in the wilderness, doesn't it?
It sure does.
That's Exodus. Leviticus is the third book of the Bible, and the Gimel book. Chapter 3 of Isaiah appears to describe the theme in the book of Exodus. Gimel is the letter of loving kindness and culmination.
Indeed it is. In fact, the idea of Gimel is that of nourishment. And J.R., Gimel is where God feeds his people and provides for them in a tender way. We have here in verse 1, for behold, the Lord of hosts doth take away from Jerusalem and from Judah the stay and the staff, the whole stay of bread, the whole stay of water. Here the nutrition, the nourishment is removed for a time of judgment in order that restitution, redemption can come out of all this.
Leviticus, which says, be ye holy even as I am holy, is really a very harsh book. It's a holiness of the law, and so he promises judgments to them for their wickedness, doesn't he?
He does indeed. As a matter of fact, the 26th chapter of Leviticus even talks about being punished 7 times more. If you don't do what I say, I'll punish you 7 times more. And he just keeps on saying that. Well, here we have the punishment.
And in Isaiah 3:8 says, Jerusalem is ruined, Judah is fallen. Verse 11, woe unto the wicked. So we can see this judgment upon his people as is given in the book of Leviticus.
Now the next chapter of Isaiah, chapter 4, it corresponds with Dalet, the 4th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Dalet is the letter of the door or the way. This would correspond to the book of Numbers, the way through the wilderness. And God provided a way. And this is a very short chapter of only 6 verses. And there is a kind of a wilderness atmosphere here, J.R. Yeah. And in that day 7 women shall take hold of one man, saying, we will eat our own bread.
You notice the number 7 right there in the opening verse?
Yeah.
And the name of the book is Numbers.
How about that?
And of course, then also in the book of Numbers, we have the tabernacle that goes with them, and the pillar of cloud that leads them through the wilderness. And we also find that mentioned in verses 5 and 6.
Indeed, in verse 6, there shall be a tabernacle for a shadow in the daytime from the heat, for a place of refuge, and a covert from storm and from rain. This tabernacle means that even though the people are going through that wilderness of judgment, he'll provide a way for them.
And in verse 5, a cloud and a smoke by day and a shining, a flaming fire by night. So chapter 4 of Isaiah certainly fits the book of Numbers, and Dalet, the letter for the way.
The way.
Chapter 5 of Isaiah is a hay chapter, and it fits with the book of Deuteronomy. In fact, I think one of the primary goals of Deuteronomy is the Song of Moses, which we find in chapter 32. And so this opens with, I think, a reference to the song.
It says in verse 1, now will I sing to my well-beloved a song of my beloved touching his vineyard. My well-beloved hath a vineyard in a very fruitful hill. Now, this kind of becomes a parable in a way.
Yeah, because this vineyard is torn apart. He says, I'm going to tear down the tower, going to, just really lay it waste. Well, this is what the Song of Moses is about in Deuteronomy 32.
It certainly is. If you don't keep my commandments, if you do not honor me, everything's going to be torn apart. And there are 6 woes in this chapter, by the way.
And Gary, this hay, the hay is fixed like a door, like the Dalet, and one extra doorpost. And it had a wide opening at the bottom, and it has a narrow opening near the top. And the rabbis say that we're all inside. We can either go out to this wide opening at the bottom to hell, or we can go out this narrow opening to heaven. Well, verse 14 is, to me, an incredible description of this hay. Hell hath enlarged herself and opened her mouth without measure, and goes on to say they'll descend into it.
A perfect picture. Also, hay is the letter associated with the grace of God. It's the number 5 in Hebrew. It's the Spirit of God. It is the grace of God. And we have this in verse 25 of this chapter. For all this, in spite of all this, his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still. This is the grace of God.
Yeah. Chapter 6 of Isaiah fits with the Vav, the meaning of the Hebrew letter, which in our book, The Mystery of the Menorah, Vav is the letter for completion and redemption and for transformation. And it's that connection between earth and heaven. Chapter 6 also fits with Joshua. Tell us, Henry.
Indeed it does. Joshua, by the way, is the book of possession, shall we say, in which the people are urged to go in, do the work of God, take possession, because God's made promises to you, and now you have work to do.
And it's a transformation of the people from the wilderness journey to the promised land.
Indeed. They are transformed into God's own warriors. It sort of takes a ragtag army and turns them into God's warriors. And the Vav speaks of transition or transformation from one thing into another. And here, Isaiah has a vision in the temple, and his reaction, verse 5, is, woe is me, I'm undone, because I'm a man of unclean lips. He says, I can't do your work.
And here's where he's transformed.
But he is transformed, because one of the seraphims which he saw in the vision, verse 6, then flew one of the seraphims unto me, having a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with the tongs from off the altar. And he laid it upon my mouth and said, lo, this hath touched thy lips, and thine iniquity is taken away, and thy sin purged. He's a changed man, a transformed man.
And he's transformed because he's seen the Lord. This, to me, this reminds me of Jacob's ladder, you know, and that Vav that is the ladder, the connection with God at the top and man at the bottom. And so we see that in the first few verses, don't we?
We do.
In chapter 7 of Isaiah, we have the Zayin, the Zayin chapter. The Zayin is the letter for sustenance and struggle, and it's the focal point. We see that also in the book of Judges, Gary.
We do. Judges is a struggle. The whole book of Judges is a struggle. There are essentially 13 judges. There are 12 periods of apostasy in Judges, just one siege after another. And the heart of Isaiah 7 has to do with Ahaz. Ahaz said, verse 12, I will not ask, neither will I tempt the Lord. And he said, hear ye now, O house of David. It is a small thing for you to weary man, but will you weary my God also? Therefore, the Lord shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. And we could say so much about this chapter, J.R., but here is sort of the kernel of the whole thing, because we have Ahaz asking, do you have a sign? Do you have something to show me? Well, I'll give you a sign, he says. And the sign references a curse, because Messiah is to be born. A virgin shall conceive. But before that can happen, there have to be 10 generations of sinful, of the sinful of the house of Judah that have to pass before the Messiah can come. The so-called curse of Coniah. This is an ages long, if you will, or hundreds of years long struggle before the Messiah can come.
This is a chapter struggle too, isn't it? It says, Rezin, king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, the king of Israel, went up toward Jerusalem to war against it, but could not prevail against it. God was sustaining them.
He was sustaining them in the midst of struggle.
Yeah. And of course, you know, Ruth is attached to Judges, and so we have this bride here at the very end of Judges. And this is the first one where two chapters are combined together. Both chapters 7 and 8 are combined together for the letter Zayin, just as Ruth was once attached to the book of Judges. Now let me just quickly explain here that 39 books became 22 when the Old Testament was originally put together. Ruth was attached to Judges. Ezra and Nehemiah were one book. There was no 1st and 2nd Samuel, Chronicles, or Kings. Lamentations was attached to Jeremiah. All 12 minor prophets were one book, considered to be one book. And so as we go through here, we're going to have to combine a couple of chapters from time to time, which is true here in chapters 7 and 8. And we can see this, this Ruth, I think, here in chapter 8, verse 3.
Verse 3, and I went in unto the prophetess, and she conceived and bare a son. Then said the Lord unto me, call his name Maher Shahal Hashbaz. Well, this is haste ye to the spoil. So what we have here is a son of judgment. But really more than that, another picture of Messiah.
And now the next two chapters, 9 and 10 of Isaiah, correspond with the Het. And the Het is the letter for transcendence, life, and grace.
It is, in a word, the new birth. And, of course, the new birth speaks of the Son of God. Verse 6, for unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder. And his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God, Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. One of the most famous prophecies in the Bible, the
Fantastic.
new birth.
Oh, that's great, Gary. We've moved now from the level of the Father to the second level of the next 7 letters, which are the ministry of the Son. Unto us a child is born. Let's come to the Tet, chapters 11 and 12. They represent 1st and 2nd Kings.
Yes, they do.
Tet.
And by the way, 1st and 2nd Kings would be then speaking of Solomon. The book of 1st Kings, actually 1st and 2nd Kings taken as a single scroll, speak of Solomon through the decline of the kings. And Solomon, of course, begins as a son of David, and he's very wise. Verse 1 here says, and there shall come forth a rod out of the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots, and the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might. Now, this is a messianic prophecy, but it's also a picture of Solomon.
Yes, of course, the prophecies of the Bible have more than one interpretation, and this is the double reference we see here.
Sure.
But boy, this is fantastic for Solomon, Gary.
It is.
It talks about his wisdom. It says, verse 3, he'll have quick understanding. He'll not judge after the sight of his eyes. That's objective. You remember Tet means objective good?
Right.
This is objective judgment.
It's the good that appears evil. You know, Solomon was a man who did a lot of evil things in his life. And with hundreds of wives, etc., and yet out of his reign came good.
The 13th and 14th chapters of Isaiah correspond with 1st and 2nd Chronicles. And the 10th letter, the Hebrew alphabet, Yod.
Yod is the name of God, by the way. It is, for example, the initial of Yahweh, the initial of Yeshua, the initial of Yerushalayim, the initial letter of Yisrael. It speaks of the things of God, the divine name. And we have here a prophecy of the day of the Lord coming. We have the Lord stepping out and judging Babylon. And we have the Lord judging Satan, that is, as he was called Lucifer, in Isaiah 14:12. We have the Lord stepping out and exercising the power of his name.
How about that? Now, chapter 13 opens with the burden of Babylon, goes right on through chapter 14, so we can see here God's judgment upon Babylon. Well, you know, 2nd Chronicles ends with Babylon coming, destroying Jerusalem, carrying the people off, and here it fits with 1st and 2nd Chronicles in this indictment against Babylon.
And I wish we had more time, because there is so much more to say. We hope that this will be an encouragement for you to take up your own individual study and sort of pick up where we left off. The next letter is Kaf. Kaf is the letter of crowning accomplishment. J.R.?
And this is chapters 15 and 16, which correspond to Ezra and Nehemiah.
And Kaf, by the way, is an interesting letter that speaks of the things accomplished in the messianic sweep of time, shall we say. I'm thinking of a verse here, verse 6, chapter 16, verse 5. And in mercy shall the throne be established, and he shall sit upon it in truth in the tabernacle of David, judging, seeking judgment, hasting righteousness. Anytime you see this letter Kaf used as an outline figure, you're really talking about that which the Messiah has accomplished, and it has to do with a crown, or it has to do with the temple very often.
Yeah, well, that fits Ezra and Nehemiah. They came back to rebuild the temple.
Right.
And here we've got the tabernacle of David in chapter 6.
Exactly.
Chapter 16, verse 5. Incredible. Now we come to Esther. And actually the 17th chapter of Isaiah fits the book of Esther and the letter Lamed, the letter for teaching and learning.
Lamed is a very tall letter that occupies the center position of the alphabet, teaching and learning. But the lesson that it deals with is the lesson of the wife and the bride. Esther, of course, the wife, saved her people under Persian rule. And by the way, we have here the burden of Damascus. Damascus desires to destroy Israel in much the same way that Haman, under King Ahasuerus, wished to destroy Israel. But guess what? Damascus gets destroyed instead.
Yeah. And of course the glory of Jacob is made thin here. So this is a struggle of the wife of God, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
We'll continue with our studies in Isaiah on our next program. We've simply run out of time for this session. But as you can see, Isaiah is a miniature Bible, and these first 39 books or chapters of Isaiah correspond to the 39 books of the Bible and the 22 divisions, the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. The next part of Isaiah continues with chapters 40 through 66, corresponding to the 27 books of the New Testament. We'll see that as time goes on.